I want you to picture something for a moment. I want you to picture this. You and your partner have a young family. You're getting ready for work. Both of you have to go into work. You are rushing around trying to get the kids ready. Say you have two kids, two young kids, like toddlers. They got to go to daycare. You got to get to work. You're trying to get ready. Not only are you trying to you shower, brush your teeth, you have your food in whatever order that you're doing. It's a bit of a rush. I remember when I was doing this when my kids were young, right? And you are trying to get the kids ready, and they're doing all the things that you don't want them to do at that time. And you're trying to get out of the house. You're just rushing. You're rushing. You may have an argument with your partner, just trying to get out of the house, and it's just it's hectic. It's a chaotic moment, right? It's a chaotic morning. Your kids might be crying at one point. Then you get them out of the house, put their jackets on. You put them in the car seat. You're trying to put them in the car seat, and then one of the kids decides, you know what? I'm not going to let you put in the car seat. I don't want to sit in the car seat. So they do what I call the ironing board. They just go straight. And if you ever seen a kid go straight like an ironing board, it means they can't sit in the seat, and you can't put the seatbelt around them for the car seat, which is the most important thing when you're driving a toddler around. You need to make sure they're in their seat. So that's happening, and you're trying to beg and plead with them to sit properly. So you don't want to yell at them. You want to make sure that they're happy and go lucky, but they're just stiff as a board. And you're trying to get them in, and finally you get them in because you kind of have to force them down a little bit. You're trying to give them maybe a goldfish or something to eat so that they can distract themselves and sit in there, and then you're fine. You get in the car, and this has happened to me so many times. You forgot that their bags are behind the car, and you back over the bags. I've done that a couple of times. Never hit a kid by any means, but I've backed over their bags, crushed their lunches and everything like that. Put the bags in the trunk because it's too late. You can't go make their lunches again. You got to put them in. You get out of the driveway. You drive. You get them off to daycare. They go to daycare. You get off to work, and you just sit in traffic because you're trying to get to work, right? And then you're going down sort of like the major roads, not a highway, but the major roads, and it's just kind of inching. The lights aren't turning green whenever you want it, and it just feels forever. So it feels like you're in a forever red. Then all of a sudden you're going and you're creeping forward, and you're like, wait a minute, the light's green, but everybody's still creeping forward. Why are we creeping forward? And then all of a sudden you realize that at the front, where everything seems to be stopped or slowed down, are a bunch of people. And they're walking in the road slowly and have these banners. Now, you don't know what they're protesting. You don't know what they're doing, but it's a protest. You are getting caught in a protest during rush hour when you are trying to get to work after you've gone through this chaotic experience getting your kids out the door and trying to get to work. And you are for sure going to be late because there's nowhere to go. You can't go down a side road. You can't go anywhere. You're stuck. And you have to wait until this protest is done or until you can get to a side road and scoot all over the place. People are mad. People are honking. People are going crazy. The start of your morning did not start the way you expected. And you're super, super frustrated. And you see some people get out and yell at the protesters, and the protesters are still there. They're not moving. Some have actually stopped in the middle of the intersection, and they've somehow cemented or glued their hands against the pavement. They have to wait till the cops come, and you're going to be super, super late. How do you explain this to your work? You're so, so stressed, and that's it. You're stuck. You're stuck for however many, half hour, an hour, 2 hours, who knows how long you're stuck for until they get these protesters off the road. This is not a hypothetical situation. This is what's been happening in a lot of places around the world, especially in the UK, when there have been activists who are trying to bring attention, like the government's attention, to climate change and stop our dependence worldwide, but also nationwide in the UK, to just stop oil. That's the name of the organization, and their major strategy is to interrupt things. And they've been very popular for interrupting traffic. You never know where, you never know when, and they are interrupting traffic. Now, they are doing it for climate change. They're doing it to raise awareness, and they are doing it to get the government's attention to say, hey, yes, we are blocking this area. We are getting people angry because we want you to stop, with your new oil platforms, with your new licenses, giving out licenses and stuff like that. We want you to stop, so we're going to continue to do this until you stop. And it's civil disobedience. It's activism at its finest, but is it really working? And what type of activism works, what type of activism doesn't, what the purpose is. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is taking action. But before we get into that, I want to make you aware that I do have a program out. If you want to take more action and follow a career in marine science and conservation, I have a private podcast that's updated weekly, and it's part of a monthly membership that I put together for this private podcast to give you strategies and tips and go through job ads like you were applying for them, and to give you tips on how to do that. It's all for $5 a month. It's super accessible for everybody. I try to make it as accessible as possible and just paying for my costs, to be honest. So if you want to go and order that or get on that podcast, there's already over 25 episodes published, and you can have access to all of those plus any new episodes that comes out. All you have to do is go to speakupforblue.com/career. That's speakupforblue.com/career. Now let's get back into the episode. Let's talk about activism, folks. This is always something that I always have like a push-pull kind of thought on. I used to think, as growing up as a young scientist, I've always had this thought that what's the point of activism? It just gets in the way. Sometimes activism can be violence, or can be violent. Other times it's just pain in the butt. When I grew up in the 80s, Greenpeace was the big activist, right, for nature, and they used to do a lot of protests, but a lot of it was like hanging banners from like a government building or something like that, and doing protests in areas where like it was more policy focused and government focused, and they still do activism, they still do protests, but now a lot of times the Greenpeace kind of has evolved over that time, over the last like 30, 40 years, and now they're more into policy, and they work with governments to introduce policy to change things that are happening. And you see a lot of organizations moving towards that, and you still see some organizations that are activists, whether they're for animal welfare, whether they're for the environment, whether they're for human rights. I mean, we see activist organizations pop up all over the place, and let's be honest, a lot of the times it's as I've matured as a scientist and matured as a person, I see the value in activism, especially at certain times and for certain policies and for certain issues. Activism is a huge thing. I mean, over the pandemic, we've seen the good and bad of activism. We've seen, the Black Lives Matter movement try and stand up for human rights, against police brutality. And then we've also seen, a lot of people stand up against sort of pandemic measures that were taken that they didn't agree with. I mean, and a lot of the times the activism that was done there was, in my opinion, was not only extremely disruptive, but almost criminal in certain aspects. That's just my personal opinion. You're more than welcome to have your own personal opinion, but there are a lot of there's a lot of things that activism has done a really good job at doing certain things. For instance, not only Greta Thunberg, but there have been a lot of activists from all over the world who have taken part in climate change protests, in climate change movements, and have really started movements and inspired hundreds of thousands of people and even millions of people around the world to strike for climate change, right? And stand up to governments. And Greta Thunberg and others have actually have been invited to the UN, and they stand up to world leaders like it's nobody's business, like nobody's been able to do before, I feel, and I think it's really interesting to see how those activists move forward. Like a lot of them are really young, and they're bold, and they know what they want, and they're not going to back down. And even though they face a lot of criticism, what I wanted to do today is I wanted to talk about an example of an organization. Now, I talked about last episode that I wanted to talk about this organization. It's an activist organization called Just Stop Oil. I want to just let you know that I've been in touch with the organization, and I'm working on getting an interview with the organization to find out not only about their strategies and tactics for activism, but also, what they hope to get out of it and how they hope to get out of it. Because if you've seen any TikToks or any Instagram videos or YouTube shorts, a lot of times they come in like short form content, or even videos that you see like clips from TV shows in the UK. You've seen Just Stop Oil. You've seen their tactics. They've interrupted the BBC Proms concert at the Royal Albert Hall. They've stopped play at Wimbledon. They've disrupted the second Ashes test. They interrupted play at the World Snooker Championship, and in that case, somebody got onto one of the snooker tables and just put out this like orange dust all over the table, almost like a cloud. And orange is the organization's color. They attempted to disrupt the British Grand Prix in Northamptonshire. They targeted the RHS Chelsea Flower Show, thrown soup at a Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery in London. So they've done quite a bit of, tactics or protests. And then, of course, you've seen them. They've closed roads, including the M25 motorway in the UK, which I believe is a major road, if not a highway. I'm not familiar with the UK, but it's a pretty major road that got a lot of people quite angry, to be honest. And it's, here's the thing. Their goal of this organization is to really it's to stop the dependence on oil. And so what they want is they have a specific focus, right? And so the organization describes itself as a coalition of groups working together to demand that the government immediately halt all future licensing and consents for the exploration, development, and production of fossil fuels in the UK. That's what they want. Okay. Now, in October 2022, the government announced plans to license up to 100 new oil and gas projects by 2025. That's pretty insane. The government also said they wanted to go net zero by 2050. However, the light leases that they're giving out here, whether they become full-blown projects or not, are, going to affect that net zero number in a negative way, in the future as production starts to begin, or as production, gets initialized and continues. And then, so it's a difficult, they're in a difficult part, right? And so you're like, where did this come from? So, where did this group Just Stop Oil all of a sudden come from? And this is what I wanted to know. And I went on the BBC and I found they have this sort of like profile of them. I'm going to read some parts. I just read some parts of it, but it just says, what is Just Stop Oil? It says, Just Stop Oil is an environmental activist group founded after Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain, which are other fossil fuel protest organizations, with organizers from both at the helm. It first came to attention following a series of protests in March 2022. This included pitch invasions, for those of us in North America, that's soccer or football, at several Premier League football grounds. And then I just kind of mentioned what they want. And so, what are their tactics? I mentioned what those tactics are. Is it legal for Just Stop Oil to block roads? It's not legal, it's illegal, but it's just a matter of, will they be, the difficult thing is they pop out of nowhere. They organize it, they pop out of nowhere, and they just pick a road, and then they have to block it. The cops get called, they get arrested. Apparently, the maximum penalty for the willful obstruction of a highway in England and Wales is 51 weeks in prison, and offenders can also be fined. So obviously, they're not going to get 51 weeks. They're not violent. However, they've caused violence. I've seen videos where I've seen motorbikes basically go right through the protests, knocking some people over. I've seen cars kind of push through, not necessarily knocking people over, but push through like an opening and people moving out of the way. I've seen people, just as my example in the middle was sort of hypothetical, it was also, quite real, where there have been men and women who have gotten out of their cars to yell at the protesters saying, I have to get my kids to daycare. I have to get to work or I'm going to lose my job. And that's, for a lot of them, you might say a lot of them, that's maybe overreactions, from the people who are obstructed by the protest. But others are worried, they're, in my opinion, these are people who are just living their lives the best that they can. And they're being obstructive to go do the things that make them money. We are also on the brink of extinction. We're at the brink of recession throughout the entire planet, it seems. Every country's at the brink. And so, people don't want to lose their jobs. People want to make sure they can get to work. They don't want to be held up. Let's be honest, being in rush hour sucks. It's a huge inconvenience when there's a protest there. And so people are not happy with this organization. But what I wanted to do is kind of get down to the deep of it. That's why I wanted to interview Just Stop Oil, because I'm like, look, you're getting a lot of people angry. Not just the media that people have gone on. It's been kind of interesting too, and I'd love to hear. I'm looking forward to answering these questions. Like they go on Piers Morgan, Piers Morgan, who's like an ultra right critic, hates anything that's feminism or anything like that. Not necessarily, I don't know if he believes in climate change, but he doesn't like Just Stop Oil. And, he basically takes the rage that people are feeling for this organization and kind of brings it out. So they've been on that episode a couple of times, and it's made clips as it's controversial and it's making waves. So I don't know if that's part of a tactic to go on that show, knowing that Piers Morgan is going to be, quite frankly, just not a nice person. I have other words for him, but just not a nice person. And so I don't know if they just do that to get the views and for people to see it. But I'm always curious. So I want to have that interview because, I don't want to say that, hey, I don't agree with everything you do. So I want to bring you on to expose you. No, I want to find out what activism is like within climate change, especially from a group that's making a big name for itself, not always in a positive light. And where is the end of the road? Where, do you work to try and end these policies? Are you talking to politicians? Are politicians reaching out to you? Because when you're into activism, you're trying to raise awareness of a particular issue, but I assume that there's an end game. And this end game here is to stop for the UK government, for Just Stop Oil, to stop promoting and approving oil and gas projects, right? And the dependence on fossil fuels. Now, on the other hand, the government that's in charge right now, and I don't know a lot about UK politics, but the government that's in charge right now is very pro, let's get our energy independence, and let's do that by investing more into oil and gas. And to be honest, Canada would be in the same boat if we had a different party in charge, right? If our conservative government in Canada was in charge, they're not into climate mitigation. They're not into a carbon tax. They are into, oil and gas and natural resources, and they would increase that production as soon as they get in, and they will if they get in, which is kind of scary just given everything we're going through right now. And so I have a feeling that's the same thing with the UK government, with the party that's in there right now. Again, I don't know a lot about the politics in the UK. Similar, but the names of the parties are different. So I'm not particularly sure how it all irons out just off the top right here. Maybe I can get more answers if a representative from Just Stop Oil comes on. But I think it's interesting from an activism point of view, right? Is like, does activism work, and can it work? I feel like the protests that Greta Thunberg, as well as other young activists around the world, displayed over just before COVID or over COVID, where many people were getting out and protesting, government inaction and the world inaction on climate change. It made a lot more people aware of climate change. And I think that pushed, ballots certain ways because people are worried about climate change, especially now that we're seeing more and more consequences of climate change. And we're getting to that point. So this is something that I think activism is something that we think we need, we definitely need. It's just, I've always wondered what the end game is. I wonder where the policies change and how do you get, like right now for Just Stop Oil, what I get, and this is what I want to clarify is, you're holding people hostage on the roads during the morning, getting them angry, not drumming up support. And then, and you're trying to do that to catch the government's eye to be like, okay, well, if we want, this organization to stop doing this, we're going to have to stop our dependence on oil. We're going to have to stop putting out this 100 new leases or new approvals for fossil fuel projects, oil and gas projects. It's hard for me to say that this will actually work. It might, and it might have in the past. So I'm curious, to hear from Just Stop Oil, to find out how they plan on doing this. What's the tactic? Are they doing something in the background that we haven't seen yet or doesn't get publicized as much? That's what I want to find out. I think it's a really interesting approach to what they're doing. And I just want to kind of get to the truth and come in with an interview that's positive, to be like, hey, I'm just trying to find out more about you and what you're trying to do, as opposed to a lot of the clips that they have on TV where it's just like arguing back and forth, not getting to the sort of the meat and potatoes, no pun intended for climate change, but just trying to get to the point where, hey, like, what do we do here? How do we support you? What's your end game? Is it policy? Is it changing policy? How are you speaking with the government? Do you have representatives that are engaged with the government at this point? Is it working? Are you making headway? Do you see it, continuing? How are you working with other organizations? All that kind of stuff, because it's not just up to one organization. It's up to many organizations. We always need the Sea Shepherds of the world, the Greenpeaces of the world, the Oceanas of the world, the Ocean Conservatory of the world, everything. We need all the different organizations to work together and be able to, and in their own different ways, whether we sometimes agree with them or not. You almost have to have the extremes and back and forth. And then at the end of the day, you hope that everything made some headway, right? And we're able to change policies. We're able to change the minds. We're able to inspire people to vote for more climate change reduction, right? For politicians who are going to put in climate change reduction policies, right? That's what we need. That's what we need to do. So it's always interesting to see how organizations make a name for themselves, whether in a positive light or in a negative light, depending on what side of the media you're on or what media you look at. But it seems like this organization is definitely getting the eyes of a lot of people, but just not in the positive way. So before I have the interview, I would love to hear from you. Just DM me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. I would love to hear what you want to find out from Just Stop Oil. What questions you would like to ask that you want to know about this organization. I think it's important that from a community perspective, we approach this. If we get the interview, we approach it as a way of like, hey, like, here's the feedback from the audience, like from our community. It's like, where's the end game? What are you trying to do? I would love to hear your questions about that. I'll ask on the episode. Obviously, I'm not going to ask any vulgar questions or anything like that, which I don't think you guys would propose. But if you're truly curious about this activism, if you're truly curious about this organization and other organizations that are working within the UK and around the world, frankly, we've seen people, attend games and get on the basketball courts and they get tackled, or a football field, or even a hockey rink, less hockey rink, because that's kind of dangerous, I would imagine. And, you see them get tackled by somebody, or, tackled by security. Baseball diamonds have it a lot. But then you see people with like powder and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm always curious of what their end game is, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So go to Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean and DM me. I'd love to hear your questions about this. And I will hopefully have Just Stop Oil on in the next couple of weeks. They seemed pretty responsive. They were just working on details of who to bring on as a representative and just our time difference. They're in the UK. I'm in North America on the Eastern Standard Time. So there's a bit of a time zone barrier, I would assume, but we're willing to work with each other to see how we can get somebody on. I think it's good to have people on that are part of these organizations to get, their true feelings without having to worry of coming on and arguing. We're all preaching to the choir here in terms of climate change and needing to do stuff and needing to take away our dependence on oil and gas and fossil fuels in general. So I want to know, what's the strategy, right? What's the strategy and how can people really help, other than protesting, where are we going with this and how do we, and has it worked in the past? And if it has, do you have examples and stuff like that? So love to hear that. So we're hopefully going to have that, but I want to hear from you at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram, at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. DM me. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you want to, have a career in marine science and conservation, please join us in the private podcast program to build your career in marine science and conservation. You go to speakupforblue.com/career. That's speakupforblue.com/career. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. It's great to talk to you. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.